Hello and welcome to the AdTech Heroes podcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the evolving role of agencies, and I'm delighted to be joined by James Buckle. James is the Chief Digital Officer for PhD Global, leading the digital approach across PhD's global account portfolio. Having spent a number of years in the AdTech space with AppNexus, James made the jump to the agency side to apply that knowledge in the evolving digital media space. Hi James, great to have you here today. How's it going?
Not too bad, thank you, Dal. Thank you for having me. Glad to be on.
Great stuff. It'd be great to kind of kickstart really and to understand your role a little bit more at PhD.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at PhD Global. So my role is primarily focused on working with our global accounts. So those are kind of accounts that are kind of broadly in across the globe, but also can have some kind of regional focus. And my role is really to kind of look at our broad kind of digital approach, whether that's to do with kind of overall planning and strategy and how that kind of aligns with our overall communications output all the way through to activation. So ensuring that our kind of capabilities and practices in the activation space are best in class and delivering what our clients are expecting of us, but also really focusing on kind of where are those new emerging areas of innovation and how do we really drive kind of progress forward within digital. And, you know, I think that especially over the past couple of years is taking on a kind of a little bit of a different shape, especially as we've seen kind of the acceleration into commerce and kind of just overall digital consumer experiences. So it's kind of touching on data and technology, not just kind of the traditional media element within it as well. So a bit of a broad ranging role, but I'm very lucky that I get to work with some of our really incredibly talented people and staff across the globe and in different markets and get to experience kind of how digital is really coming to life in those markets in different ways. So it's a role that keeps me kind of excited and enthused and getting out of bed every morning. So I'm very lucky and privileged to be able to do what I do.
And how has that been in the last 2 years? You said you work across many different markets. You probably talk to colleagues daily in different time zones. How has that been in the last 2 years?
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenge, but I think it's one that's been interesting. I think with the pandemic, that has had an impact on our clients' businesses in a number of different ways. Obviously, certain categories have been more heavily impacted, but every category has seen some impact in their own way. So it has been challenging, but also what that's created is, I think, some really unique opportunities for us as an agency and how we operate with clients, but also did create a real acceleration in kind of clients' focus. I think especially in the digital space, we heard more around service requirements and in digital than we ever had before, and I think it accelerated kind of their focus on either digital propositions, whether they think of digital consumer experiences and how they actually engage in different and creative ways with consumers, but also the requirements that they have of us as an agency and how we operate and how we add value to their business. So it's certainly been tough, but also super interesting. And I think, especially as certain regions and different markets are coming into recovery at different stages, and obviously now we're seeing even continued implications of kind of lockdowns and the impacts that has on consumer behavior. It's something that's ebbing and flowing quite a lot and requires us to be very agile and flexible with how we focus this, and deliver those requirements. And we have been quite lucky, I have to say, for us as PhD. We've had some really positive and strong client wins over this period, which has kept us nice and busy. There are obviously, I think, as every agency in the industry is kind of feeling, the challenges on talent, bringing the right type of talents into the business, and understanding the markets is certainly having an implication on everyone. So has given us a lot of kind of food for thought about how we approach this and put more creative solutions in place for our business. But overall, it has been, I would say there's been a huge amount of learnings for us throughout this process, and it really has allowed us to start to figure out how we're going to shape our approach in the future, but also how do we continue to kind of galvanize our workforce and get the most out of our people, whilst also creating, an environment where they can really thrive and succeed.
And would you say these advertisers that you're working with are leaning on you because you have your global capabilities, you have offices all around the world, you've got people working for you all around the world from different backgrounds and different skill sets. And do you really see that's a big reason why they're kind of trusting you with their budgets moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our scale and our ability to operate effectively as a network is a core part of that. Not just for us as PhD, but also more broadly as part of OMG and working with all our partners in the group, whether that's kind of our data and technology arms or other areas actually of Omnicom as well. When we think of capabilities that sit more broadly, whether that's a retail focus within Omnicom Retail Group, our precision marketing group has kind of really key capabilities that we're now leveraging for our clients. So I think those scaled offerings and kind of different services that can add value are really why they continue working with us. And I think it is also we have to continue to demonstrate that value and evolve that value over time. But I think having all that talent and expertise and understanding of how different markets are evaluating the requirements in digital is really key to that. But it is an ongoing challenge. Those requirements are changing very, very quickly and at a pace that I don't think we've ever seen before. I think, we are now starting to see a little bit of return to normality, or what we would potentially class as normality. I think it will never be the same as it was before, really. But we are seeing a little bit of more of it kind of return to how it was pre-pandemic. But with that, we still have to take that lens of this hasn't gone away. It's going to be something that we still need to take into account. And we still need to be able to kind of really agilely adjust to those needs and adjust our capabilities to clients and their requirements.
Yeah, I think we've all needed to adapt, haven't we, over the last 2 years? And since you started your career in media, how have you seen agencies evolve over that period of time?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think I started my career off actually on a technology side, and I worked for a DSP and for AppNexus for a number of years. So I come from, I'm a bit of a tech geek, and that is very much still a lot of the basis of kind of where I focus. But I think what I've definitely seen and my journey working in an agency, having been here for kind of almost 5 years now, is not that it wasn't consultative before. I think the output has always been consultative, but I think the landscape fundamentally has got so much more complex, whether that's to do with regulation, with data and technology, whether that's to do with emerging channels and platforms. Let's take, for example, like the rise of TikTok, and that wasn't a platform 5 years ago, right? And suddenly it's so widely used and adopted, and it's created a bit of a shift for agencies, I think, to be able to kind of simplify that complexity, but also provide value from a consultative standpoint. And I think, specifically from a media agency standpoint, not necessarily, it isn't, the days are gone of kind of simple commoditized media where it was okay, I can just run this campaign, I deliver this piece, and this is the result. It's more being able to understand those non-linear consumer journeys, and really understand where is the value of different touch points and how do you create the right messaging and put that in the right place at the right time. And that requires a real breadth of understanding, but also maintaining, that specialism in those areas. So I think a big thing, as you've probably seen across agencies, but especially for us, is ensuring that we have that specialist capabilities and understanding, whether that's in the traditional channels, search, social, display, programmatic, but moving into commerce, understanding platforms like Amazon kind of intimately and how the value that adds. But then also being able to, I think for us, which has been a big shift, is understanding the implications of marketing technology. So how does on-site personalization, for example, work with off-site? How do we actually make online work more effectively with offline and deliver more integrated solutions? And especially with future topics that we know are coming in the space, cookieless being one of them, like how do we engage with consumers in the right way? So I think really is what's had to happen is, agencies have had to evolve their approach and build the right capabilities to facilitate that thinking and simplify that. So, for us, at Omnicom, Omni is at the core of everything we do, and that platform is designed to help simplify that landscape and allow our teams to deliver their best work and facilitate that thinking. But but then also making sure that we are training and developing our teams to be able to think about those problems in a different way, and think about them in a way that the consumers are actually behaving nowadays. And I think that is something that is a constant evolution. It's something that we're really focused on, and we don't think we've kind of done it and then it's kind of finished. It's something that we constantly have to try and stay ahead of where the market is going, so that we can provide the best services to our clients and continue to add that value to what they're doing. And that's something for myself personally that I'm really focused on trying to develop with kind of our partners within OMG and the broader group, is how do we create those kind of development programs, but also the opportunities for our staff to be exposed to things that are outside of their immediate job roles, and can give them additional value, so that we can create more well-rounded, stronger individuals who are working on our clients' businesses.
I think that's an important thing you just mentioned. I've always worked media owner side, and you would approach agency folk, and they'd be in separate buckets. So an AV team, you might have a display team, social team, etc. Is that all changing now then, would you say? Or has it changed? And whereas one person would need to know 6 or 7 different disciplines, and like you said, a new TikTok might come out, or a whole new platform might come out with a massive amount of scale, a massive amount of interest, so then they'll have to pick that up as well. So how has that dynamic changed? Are they always swapping the hats that they wear, and depending on who they're talking to?
It's a good question. I think it does depend on the agency, and it depends on market. I still think there is an absolute need for people to have that specialist knowledge. And so I think you were saying, for example, display, social teams, search teams, those exist. And speaking more directly in terms of how I operate my teams here at PhD Global, we do have those teams. We have search, social, and programmatic, for example, or commerce activation. But what we are trying to develop is for those even individuals who have a specialism to still have a broader understanding of how that connects into those other channels. So it may not be that they intimately know how the platforms work and how they need to deliver campaigns in those environments, but having a clear understanding from an integration standpoint, what is what I'm doing, what is the impact that has on other areas of delivery, and how do those work effectively together. But I do think there is a necessity, especially when we're talking about our planning and our strategic output, there needs to be a broad understanding across all of those capabilities so that you can create effective plans. So I work really closely with our chief strategy officer and our heads of planning and heads of strategy in the agency to make sure that digital is represented in the right way in those the way that we approach that work, but also that we're continuing to kind of stay ahead of the curve. Like, what do we think that emerging channel is going to be? What do we think those new opportunities are going to be? And for us at PhD, one of our core values and approaches is around creativity. So how do we layer that within the digital space and move away from in some ways, I think digital has become quite functional and quite transactional, and especially when we think of metrics and how we evaluate the efficacy of digital media. So how do we provide a creative lens to that to create unique consumer experiences that are going to allow our clients to stand out whilst still delivering those kind of business results that they would expect?
That's a good point about creativity. What's creative to you? I could ask the same question to 10 different people within the industry, and people might talk about creative, data, measurement. Yeah. What does creativity mean to you?
Yeah, and it's hopefully not a too simplistic an answer. I think it's a mixture of all of those pieces like that you just touched on. Yes, creative and the messaging that we deliver absolutely plays a fundamental part to that. And I think, from our standpoint as a media agency working with our creative agencies, but also creative partners that our clients are working with to help influence that from a media standpoint. So how are the touch points that we have access to and understanding of going to impact that creative message? And I think we do that through a few different ways. It's by understanding our audiences and utilizing data in the right way to understand them effectively, understanding the performance of our campaigns and learning from what we've done previously to make sure that we're taking those into account and adapting our approaches. But also then I think there isn't. Everyone is operating in the same spaces at the moment, and I think especially over the past couple of years, and with regulation, we all know this, right? It's the main players that are getting the majority of the spend, and so you're trying to compete in the same areas. So there isn't, for us, and at least for me, from a digital standpoint, is how do we take what are in some ways commoditized platforms, when we think of the formats that are available to us all, and layer in that creativity within our execution to allow our clients to not just stand out, but to deliver that disproportionate impact. And really then, from our perspective, if we're able to drive that brand perception, we will in turn drive disproportionate growth. And that's something that's kind of consistent within our approach to strategy. So it's kind of looking, are there, new tests or betas that we can try to truly understand, are these going to work at scale for our clients, or are they not? And I think that's also something that sits at the heart of what we do, is not being afraid to test something and learn from it, and going through those iterative processes and, testing a hypothesis. Do we think this is going to have an impact, and how do we layer in creativity within that? Whether that is to do with the type of message or how we're engaging with them, to kind of understand that and then deliver something that is going to provide, in short, the impact that our clients expect. But always just thinking about what that next stage is. So, for us here at PhD, we have teams kind of focused purely on doing that, as I'm sure most agencies do, whether that's within our strategy or innovation teams. And so we all work incredibly collaboratively together to make sure that we're kind of understanding what is working, what isn't, and putting the right kind of opportunities in front of our clients.
Amazing. And then what role does AdTech play in all of this within agencies?
Yeah, I think it plays an ever more important role. I think AdTech has obviously been a continuing kind of area of focus for agencies for a long time now. But I think especially as, the acceleration into digital and the acceleration into kind of overall digital experiences for brands and advertisers that may have not played in that space before, AdTech is front of mind for clients. And I think especially as more and more clients are making kind of specific decisions about who they work with and taking more control and ownership of their ad technology approach, it is something that we need to be incredibly well versed in, so that we can help provide, unbiased recommendations to our clients. And I think that is a key point for us, as well as having an agnostic approach to who we work with. Obviously, you expect, there's the players that are kind of have the market share, obviously, are the ones you have to be incredibly well educated on as well. But understanding how all of those different pieces play together, and how we can in some ways help our clients future-proof their approach, and make sure that they're going to extract the maximum value for our technology. So I think it is only going to play more and more of a requirement in terms of what we're doing, and that's why we've invested in teams of people who evaluate the ad tech specifically and try to maximize the value that we can out of those partners, and understand what those product roadmaps are, what features are going to make sense, what can we test within there, how can we provide constructive feedback to the partners that we work with so that they can evolve their platforms in ways that are going to suit the needs in the future. And, I have to say a good majority of my conversations with my clients now are around ad tech in some ways, and how we maximize the value out of them. But also, understanding the limitations. These are not these are not like holy grail solutions, right? That they can deliver. There are limitations in terms of what we can do. So it's how do we work with them in the right way? And I think for us as well, as I mentioned before, kind of Omni, which is our kind of precision-based marketing platform, we've done a lot of work at an OMG level to integrate our technology directly into the system so that we can kind of allow ourselves to flex easily across different ad tech solutions and ad tech stacks, and try to maximize the value and extract that value from the platforms, not just from an execution and activation, but also understanding how we can get insights out of those platforms and use that to influence our strategy and planning as well.
And how much of that is initiated by the client versus yourselves? If there's a new provider in the market, which there seems like it's a great industry to be in, right? Because there's so much innovation, creativity, so many startups, pop out of nowhere every year. And who's kind of leading that conversation? Is it you guys on the agency side, or sometimes the client actually approaches you and says, "Look, we saw this company, and it looks like they're doing really well. Shall we work with them?" How is that working at the moment?
I would say it's dependent on the client. And I think, especially when we see certain types of ad technology which are quite category specific and have been built to meet the need of a certain category, generally you would probably see the route to that is through the client, that they're the first people to talk to. But, our role as an agency is to proactively provide recommendations to our clients and bring the right opportunities. So I'd say it is dependent on client and kind of a hybrid approach, but we do a lot of that. And so, we have teams that are trying to understand what is coming to market, speaking to those providers, understanding the value so that we can then align those opportunities with clients in the right way. So I would say it is very dependent, but we invest heavily in teams to do that. And it's part of, I still stay very close to it. It's coming from an ad tech background. It's something that's very close to my heart as well, and trying to work and understand kind of the value that other ads, especially when there's kind of like broad topics that are coming, for example, one for us that has been for a while, but is continuing is around attention, and how we kind of work and understand attention and from a planning and an execution standpoint. So there's obviously a number of providers that are kind of coming to play in that space. And so that's something that's really top of mind for us to kind of proactively bring those to our clients and understand the best fit of technology for their needs.
Perfect. And with ad tech then, I'm guessing it brings its efficiencies, right? And have you seen that develop over time?
Yeah, I kind of think about efficiencies in a different way, and or probably not in a different way to other people, but it's kind of twofold. I think, yes, there are efficiencies, but I think actually what has happened is, as I kind of mentioned before, is the landscape has become more complex. And, I've hear a lot of people say, like, whether that's, on LinkedIn posts or whatever it may be, that digital media is not complex. Like, I fundamentally disagree with that as a statement. Like, if you think that's the case, you haven't worked in this space for a bit, or tried to deliver campaigns or understand consumer experiences. And yes, the platforms do help simplify that and do some of the heavy lifting. But where the efficiencies really come for us is how we can be kind of more operationally efficient, how we can get to the better outcomes more quickly by learning from what we're doing. But it still requires that human element on top of it. Like, my teams, and I would they definitely don't do this, but if it was a case of we just set campaigns and let them run and hope that algorithms are going to do all of the work for us, you're not going to get the best of results. We still need to layer our the expertise that our teams have on top of that to understand how those platforms are behaving, understand how those algorithms are behaving in a lot of ways, and figure out how do we maximize the value of how those platforms work. Otherwise, we're just going to be doing the same thing as everyone else. And that isn't going to work for our clients' business. It needs to be adapted to what they are looking for, and making sure that we're making the right planning decisions, optimization decisions, to deliver the objectives, and fundamentally to make sure that we're delivering that performance that they expect and driving that performance forward. So, I think it does drive efficiencies, but I think the efficiencies it's driving is to solve for an ever evolving landscape. And, whether that's the volume of impressions and decisions that these platforms need to make, but also, the different opportunities that now consumers have to engage with us. It's not, you're not just delivering on a website or on a video platform. Previously, it's like, okay, how do I now engage with them effectively in a digital audio standpoint, and then on a video, and then on a display ad, but then they're going to go get a search ad, and understanding that it isn't even a sequential messaging anymore. It's how do we find the right place at the right time to essentially provide that weight around the message that's going to help influence and let them understand the value of the products that we're trying to position to them as well.
Definitely. Slightly changing topics here, but in-housing is a term that has been used for many, many years. Yeah. We've had events all around the world talking about in-housing, and you know, it's still a hot topic, right? And again, in-housing means different things to different people, different industries. So, in your opinion, how important is in-housing?
I think it's very important, right? Like it's not a topic that's going away, and it's also not a topic that I think agencies should be scared of. And I think the part of the problem with the term is in-housing is a very broad categorization of a number of different things, and it actually means a very different things to different people and to different businesses. And so it is something that we've been doing a lot of work about. We have actually just released a piece of thought leadership called Shift, which is around a marketing rethink. And there is an entire chapter around in-housing in there. Shameless plug for myself that I co-authored that with some of my colleagues internally here at PhD. And you know, what we really try to outline that is that there are these varying degrees of what in-housing means, and you know, whether does that, and what is the kind of key desire or ambition behind in-housing? Is that more control? Is that more visibility into what they're doing? Is that, you know, to have, for example, it could be just ownership of their ad tech. It could be a simple classification of in-housing, because a lot of clients don't necessarily have that approach in place or at the moment. So it's really beholden on us as agencies to try to really deeply understand what is the ambition, and how do we support that. But also, I think the value that we can add as an agency does change and does, forgive the pun, shift in that world. And that's something that we've been working with a number of our clients. Like we have a number of clients who have in-house their buying. And that does obviously change the position that we more traditionally would have had in terms of our services, but also then gives us opportunity to focus on new services and new capabilities that allow us then to help them deliver their business. You know, one of the key ones that we hear, obviously, from clients that have in-housing is not necessarily getting exposure to what's happening in the wider industry, because you're just potentially operating in your category and then operating solely on your brand. So, you know, we have developed services to allow our clients to understand more broadly what's happening in the industry and take value from our understanding and what we get to learn and how we get to stay on kind of the leading edge of what's happening across the digital ecosystem. And so that's why I think for me personally, it's obviously not a topic that's going to go away, and it shouldn't. And I think it's the right path for a lot of clients to go on. It won't be the right path for others as well. And that's why I think it isn't something that agencies should be scared of. If you're creating value for clients, irrespective of how that's done, they'll continue to see kind of the merit of your partnership. And I think, you know, that's a big topic for us is like, how do we continue to do that and do that in the way that's kind of, you know, one, authentic and not just doing it for the sake of it, but actually giving us kind of learnings and proof points that we can use to develop our capabilities over time as well.
Is that an easy conversation to have from the client to drop you a call and say, look, we're thinking about in-housing? What's the immediate response? Is it kind of, you know, it'd be great to understand that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it is very dependent on client. I think for us, we always try to be open about it. I think, you know, the one thing that we want clients to be aware of is to understand the complexity of doing these types of buys. Like it is not easy, and it isn't the things that people necessarily always think about. Yes, obviously you need to have the expertise around planning and optimization and how you're actually going to deliver those pieces. But a lot of also what we help our clients understand is the operational requirements. Like it's how do you manage finance and billing and invoicing from if you're running let's say an in-housing hub across a number of markets, how do you do that and make sure that your invoices are paid on time? How do you get your briefs effectively? How do you gatekeep those briefs? How do you iterate through that structure? How do you get the most out of the platforms that you're working with? How do you look at new opportunities, whether that's in terms of planning and insights or data that can potentially be used? So we try to kind of help set the scene of like, here's the dependencies that we believe are required to be successful. And it's very much framed in that way, like what is required for you to be successful to do this? Because we've been on this journey for years, right? Like we've learned a lot about what's required to run these types of operations. And so, we can help them on that journey and make sure that, they don't fall down pitfalls that we've experienced before. So, that can be a tough conversation. I think sometimes obviously there's a perception that agencies are defensive and only want to keep the buying because, that's the way that, we've historically made revenue. But I think if, as I said, kind of mentioned before, for us, it's really about like, if we can have services that are going to continue to add value, that's going to continue to kind of, keep us in the frame and keep us in the picture. And so again, it shouldn't be something that we're afraid of. It's really just a shift in how we're thinking about media services and what those mean to our clients.
Yeah, I think the key word there is value, isn't it? I think not just on the agency side, but also media owner side, AdTech side, publisher side. As long as we're adding value to the chain, it makes sense. And, there's obviously been conversations on SPO and, are these different, bodies within the supply chain actually adding value or not? And I know people will argue for and against, but yeah, I think again, the key word is definitely value there. In terms of, you touched on the global agency hubs and, from looking on the outside, it seems like a lot of these are popping up within agency groups. So you'd have them across all the major holding companies. How have they been operating? Is it different for each client? Is it dependent on the category? It'd be good to understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely, and I know those firsthand. I have centralized hubs within my team, or centralized consolidated hubs maybe, and that's a big part of what we do here as well, to operate either regional or in some cases global operations. I think we are being asked a lot by clients to evaluate those, and I will say it's not right for every client. As I mentioned before, kind of there's dependencies in terms of it really comes down to a lot of the administrative side of it. Like, how are your campaigns going to be briefed? Who are the clients that you need to engage with? How are you going to manage the finance and the reconciliation and those processes? But the way that they're structured inside, or at least the way that we approach this, is we have kind of clear frameworks and ways of working that we put in place, which really create the foundation of our approaches. So those are very much developed over a number of years and experiences of delivering these. So again, that we don't fall down the pitfalls that we know can happen with them. But then what we do is layer on top that the level of kind of customization or adaptation to client-specific needs, obviously driven primarily by where are they investing and where is that investment going, by channel. What are the capabilities that they actually need? Where are they on their journey, especially from a digital perspective? And I think that touches on what you mentioned in kinds of differences by category, but also clients within those categories. And so that plays very much into our evaluation and how we structure our teams. And so, for example, for us, we do operate a number of hubs here, and those on the surface look quite different, but actually that sits behind it is a consistent kind of operational approach that makes sure that we can try and maximize and extract the value from those teams, but also allow ourselves to iterate over time. And I think that's another key point that feeds into this is we don't set a model that we go, okay, here's something we put in place and that's what you have to have for the length of your contract. It's a constant learning process and iterative process that allows us to make changes and flex how we're doing. And I think, especially last year with the pandemic, there's something that kind of really came to the fore with it, which is, we had a lot of requirements to be more agile, to be able to deal with, obviously leaner teams on client side, but still having to deliver a similar amount of workload. So that kind of mandated quite a high degree of focus for us to figure out, okay, how do we adapt to those, and how do we do something that works not just for our clients' business, but also allows our people to enjoy and be motivated by what they're doing, but also allow them to develop. So it certainly is an ask that we get a lot. I do think it's not necessarily right for every client, and that is, goes very much into our initial kind of planning and team building exercises and team designs that we do with our clients. And we're also quite clear with our clients if we don't think it's right. It's something we collaborate with them on, and we'll be very upfront with them that we don't think that's the right piece. And generally that's driven by where they are in certain stages of their kind of journey. But also, as I mentioned before, kind of outlining those dependencies that need to be put in place to make that successful.
And I think key there is probably communication, right, within teams. So if you've got a central hub that's activating or planning for 10 different markets, I'm guessing that they would have to speak to their PhD colleagues on the ground, find out who the key kind of options are, whether it's media owners or AdTech platforms that they'll be using. So I'm guessing communication's a big part of that.
Massive part of it, and how we make sure that also, especially for taking my teams here in London that operate, like, how do we make sure that they're understanding the nuance and that context at a local market level? So collaboration and communication is really key. Obviously kind of collaboration software is a huge part of, I think, of everyone's business now after the pandemic, and continues to be a massive part of ours, but it is also kind of the mechanisms that we put on top of that to facilitate that learning. Because it's all well and good me being able to ping one of my colleagues in France or Italy or in the US, or I spend a lot of time talking to our APAC teams as well. But we also have to create that mechanism of forum for shared learning, and to surface the great work that's happening in those markets so that we can then replicate that and represent that in our planning. So you're completely right. Communication, I would say, is probably the most, if not the most important piece of it. And then I would say probably coupled with like clear operational processes and clear ways of working, so that everyone has real clarity in the expectations and their role in delivering that output.
Yeah, I think the operational process there is important, because you don't want anyone to suffer from burnout, right? Because if they're constantly logged on every time zone across the globe, you will find habits of just checking your emails before you go into sleep, responding, etc. So have you put those things in place where you're like, you don't have to respond to an email if you see it at 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah, we have tried to kind of put the barriers, especially for our teams. Like, so for example, my digital teams have like no Zoom Fridays, which is something that we've put in place to allow people to really just focus on their output and their work, and finish the kind of week off strong. But it is a challenge as well, right? Like it's something that, when you have people who care and are passionate about what they do, sometimes it's hard to kind of put structures in place that limits that. But I think the key thing that we've done is like, how can we get more efficient in the way that we work, but also ensure that there is that real clarity in what we're doing. So, those are around workflow management, and how we actually work across the different stages of delivering a campaign. And that gives us kind of clear points of analysis so that we can look at our capacity, look at our utilization, look at where we need to either invest in new types of resource or change our processes, find those kind of like bottlenecks or pinch points. And, we have our media operations teams who do that at scale, and they're constantly looking at those areas of improvement. And as you say, burnout is a real thing, and it's something I'm constantly conscious of. I would say my main role, really, and I should have probably said this up front, is looking after our people. The people are at the core of our agency, and they're the element, they're the best asset that we have. And so that is my primary responsibility. And that also does mean sometimes having challenging conversations with clients in terms of, but as long as we can clear about their expectations and how we can meet those expectations, we always believe that we can get to the right outcome for them.
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? Keep your staff happy, keep your clients happy. It kind of works in that way. I've got one final question for you. And it's the usual way of finishing off a podcast episode that we've been running. If you had a superpower in AdTech, what would it be?
Yeah, I love that question, by the way. I think it's a great way to finish it off. And I think for me, as I've kind of touched on before, I think for me, it's making the simple complex. And being able to connect those dots across what is, even when we're seeing consolidation, it's a fragmented ecosystem. And we need to have an understanding across a variety of different topics. So I think it's incredibly important to be able to do that and simplify that down to something that's easy for our clients to digest and understand the impact that that's going to have on their business. So I'd probably say, if it's put that into one word, like simplification probably would be the superpower for me.
Amazing. Brilliant. Well, that's all we've got time in today's podcast. Thanks, James, for your time.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.